At some point in life, almost everyone discovers an uncomfortable truth about people. It usually happens quietly. There's no dramatic warning, no moment where someone stands up and tells you directly. Instead, it appears through experience, through a situation that leaves you slightly confused at first because something about it doesn't feel fair. Maybe someone you trusted suddenly began acting differently. Maybe a colleague who once seemed friendly started making subtle comments that slowly changed how others saw you. Or maybe someone quietly positioned themselves to gain an advantage, even if it meant putting you at a disadvantage. And the first time you notice something like that, the reaction is almost always emotional. You feel frustrated. You feel the urge to defend yourself. You want to explain the truth and correct the situation. For a long time, I believed that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and treated people well, the world would eventually respond with fairness. It's the belief most of us grow up with. Work hard, be respectful, do the right thing, and everything will balance out in the end. It's a comforting idea, but life has a subtle way of challenging that belief because as you gain more experience with people, you begin to notice something interesting. Not everyone plays the game the same way. Some people compete openly, some people collaborate, and some people operate quietly, strategically, and sometimes unfairly. The first time I truly understood this was during a situation where someone wasn't attacking me directly. There were no arguments, no open conflict, but small things began happening. A comment here and a slight change in how information was shared. A subtle shift in how a situation was framed. Individually, none of those things seemed serious, but over time, the pattern became clear. Someone was quietly shaping the environment to their advantage. At first, I tried to respond the way most people do. I tried to correct the misunderstanding. I tried to explain my perspective. I tried to confront the situation directly. But the more emotional energy I invested, the more I seemed to lose control of the situation. And that experience taught me something that took years to fully understand. In situations like this, the person who reacts the fastest is rarely the one with the advantage. The advantage belongs to the person who understands the game that is actually being played because beneath everyday conversations and social interactions. So there are often deeper layers of human behavior, ambition, status, influence, fear of losing position. These forces quietly shape how people act, sometimes in ways that are subtle and strategic rather than open and obvious. Once you begin to see this pattern, something changes. You stop reacting to every small provocation. You stop assuming that every conflict is about truth or fairness. Instead, you begin to observe. You begin to notice motives. You begin to understand timing. And perhaps most importantly, you learn the power of staying calm while others lose control. Because one thing I've noticed over and over again is this: the people who succeed in complex social environments are rarely the loudest. They are rarely the most reactive. More often, they are the ones who remain calm while everyone else is caught in emotional reactions. Now, they watch, they listen, they understand the situation before making a move. Almost like a chess player who sees several moves ahead while others are focused only on the current moment. This kind of thinking doesn't mean becoming cynical. It doesn't mean assuming the worst about people. But it does mean developing a deeper awareness of how human dynamics actually work. And once you gain that awareness, you gain something powerful. Clarity. The kind of clarity that allows you to stay steady when others try to provoke you. The kind of clarity that helps you recognize manipulation without becoming trapped by it. And the kind of clarity that allows you to move through difficult situations with patience and strategy rather than frustration. In this audio book, we're going to explore how that mindset works. We'll look at the hidden dynamics behind human behavior, why emotional reactions often destroy your advantage, how subtle manipulation works in everyday situations, and most importantly, how to develop the calm, strategic thinking that allows you to navigate these situations without losing your balance. Because in a world where some people play dirty, the real advantage doesn't come from becoming more ruthless. It comes from becoming more aware, more patient, and far more strategic than the people around you. And once you understand that, something interesting happens. You stop feeling threatened by the game because you finally understand how it's played. Chapter 1. The Hidden Game of Human Nature. There is a quiet game that exists beneath everyday interactions. Most people sense it at some point in their lives, but few ever stop to truly understand it. On the surface, our world appears simple. People talk about teamwork, fairness, honesty, and cooperation. And in many situations, those values are real. But beneath those ideals, there is another layer of human behavior that quietly shapes how people act. A layer driven by ambition, by insecurity, by the desire to protect one's position, and sometimes by the fear of being replaced. Human beings are not only social creatures, we are also competitive creatures. This does not always show itself in obvious ways. Competition does not always look like open conflict. Very often, it appears in much quieter forms in a person subtly taking credit for an idea. Someone shaping a narrative before others have the chance to speak. A colleague highlighting another person's mistake while quietly hiding their own. None of these actions may look dramatic in the moment, but over time they influence perception, and perception is often more powerful than reality. This is why many people feel confused when they encounter situations where someone plays unfairly because they are still looking at the world through the lens they were taught growing up. Work hard, be kind, be honest, and things will work out. But the reality of human dynamics is more complex. People are influenced by status, by opportunity, by the need to feel secure in their position. And sometimes those motivations lead them to behave strategically rather than openly. And understanding this is the first step toward thinking like a strategist. Not because you must become cynical, and certainly not because you must assume the worst about everyone, but because clarity about human nature allows you to move through situations with awareness rather than surprise. Many of the frustrations people experience in professional and social environments come from a simple mismatch between expectation and reality. They expect interactions to be purely rational and fair. But human behavior is rarely that simple. People respond to incentives. They respond to pressure. They respond to fear. And they respond to the invisible hierarchies that exist in every social environment. Once you begin to see this, something important happens. You stop taking certain behaviors personally. You begin to recognize patterns. You notice when someone is trying to control a narrative. You notice when someone is protecting their image. You notice when someone is quietly competing for influence. And once you see these patterns, the emotional intensity of these situations often begins to fade because you realize that many of these actions are not really about you as an individual. They are about position, about perception, about influence. Imagine observing a chess match. To someone who does not understand the game, the movement of pieces may seem random. But to someone who understands strategy, every move has a purpose. Human behavior often works the same way. What appears random is often strategic. What appears emotional is sometimes calculated, and what appears personal is often part of a larger dynamic. This is why the ability to observe calmly becomes such a powerful advantage. When you are not immediately reacting to every action, you begin to see the structure of the situation more clearly. You see who is influencing the environment. You see who is protecting their position, and you see who is acting emotionally without understanding the larger picture. One of the most powerful habits you can develop is the habit of observation. Instead of reacting immediately to what people say, pay attention to what they do. Watch how they behave when pressure appears. Watch how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Watch how they handle mistakes. And perhaps most revealing of all, watch how they behave when someone else begins to gain attention or recognition. Human behavior becomes very clear when status begins to shift. So some people celebrate the success of others. Others quietly begin to resist it. And that moment often reveals far more about someone's character than anything they say. When you start observing these patterns, you begin to understand something important. The game of human interaction is rarely about a single moment. It is about patterns over time. This is why strategists rarely rush into emotional reactions. They understand that one moment rarely defines the situation. Instead, they observe the pattern. They gather information. They allow the situation to reveal itself. And when the moment to act finally arrives, they move with clarity rather than confusion. This approach may appear slow to those who react impulsively. But in reality, it is far more powerful because the person who understands the structure of the game always has an advantage over the person who reacts blindly within it. In the chapters ahead, we will explore how to develop this kind of calm awareness. How to recognize manipulation without becoming paranoid. How to protect your position without losing your integrity. And how to move through difficult human dynamics with patience, clarity, and quiet strategy. Because once you understand the hidden game of human nature, something important changes. You stop being surprised by it. And when you are no longer surprised by the game, you finally have the ability to play it wisely. Chapter 2. The Dangerous Mistake. Smart people make there is a mistake that intelligent people make surprisingly often. In fact, the more thoughtful and rational a person is, the more likely they are to fall into this trap. It's the belief that if something is unfair, the best response is to immediately explain the truth, to correct the situation, to defend yourself with logic. At first glance, this seems completely reasonable. After all, if someone spreads a misunderstanding or behaves unfairly, the natural instinct is to fix the problem as quickly as possible. You want clarity. You want fairness. You want people to understand what really happened. But the reality of human dynamics is rarely that simple. Because when emotions enter a situation, logic often stops being the primary force shaping the outcome. This is where many intelligent people lose their advantage without realizing it. They assume the situation is about facts, but the situation is often about perception. Imagine a meeting where an idea is discussed. One person introduces a concept early in the conversation. At the time, the room barely reacts. Later in the discussion, someone else repeats the same idea but frames it slightly differently. Suddenly, the room becomes interested. People nod. The idea gains momentum. The second person receives the credit. From a purely logical perspective, this feels unfair. The first person may immediately feel the urge to correct the situation. They might say something like, "I actually mentioned that earlier." And while that statement may be true, it often does something unexpected. Instead of restoring their position, it can make them appear defensive. The emotional reaction shifts the energy of the room. What was once a subtle moment now becomes an awkward one, and the advantage quietly moves to the person who appears calmer. This is one of the most important lessons about human interaction. The moment you react emotionally, you often lose strategic control of the situation. Not because your reaction is wrong, but because emotional responses change how others perceive your position. People naturally associate calmness with confidence, and they often associate visible frustration with weakness even when the frustration is justified. This does not mean you should ignore unfair situations. It means you must understand timing. Strategic thinkers rarely react in the exact moment when emotions are strongest. Instead, they observe first. They ask themselves quiet questions. What is really happening here? Is this a misunderstanding? Is someone protecting their reputation? Or is someone intentionally shaping the narrative? The answers to these questions often reveal far more than the initial situation itself. One of the most powerful abilities you can develop is the ability to pause. Not for hours, sometimes not even for minutes, just long enough to prevent your emotions from choosing your next move. Because emotions move quickly, strategy moves carefully. When someone feels threatened or challenged, their first instinct is often to protect their image. They may interrupt, they may deflect, they may attempt to shift attention elsewhere. If you respond emotionally in that moment, you are stepping directly into the reaction they expect. But when you remain calm, say something interesting happens. You disrupt the pattern. The emotional momentum disappears and suddenly the situation becomes clearer. Many experienced leaders understand this instinctively. In high-pressure environments, the person who stays calm becomes the center of stability. Others begin to look toward them for direction, not because they spoke the loudest, but because they controlled their reactions. There is a quiet psychological effect that occurs when someone refuses to be pulled into emotional chaos. It creates space to observe, space to think, space to understand the structure of the situation. And once you see that structure, you gain the ability to act with intention instead of impulse. This is why the most effective strategists often appear slower than everyone else. They are not slow because they lack awareness. They are slow because they are gathering information. They are watching how people behave when pressure appears. They are noticing who reacts emotionally and who remains composed. These details reveal far more about a situation than any single moment of conflict. And the person who understands those patterns is always in a stronger position. Think about the difference between a storm and a calm lake. In the middle of a storm, the surface is chaotic. Waves crash in every direction. It is almost impossible to see beneath the surface. But when the water becomes calm, everything becomes visible. You can see depth. You can see movement. You can see what lies beneath. Human interactions often work the same way. Emotional reactions create storms. Calm observation creates clarity. And clarity is the foundation of strategy. This is why one of the most powerful habits you can develop is emotional discipline. Not the suppression of emotion, but the control of it. The ability to feel frustration without immediately expressing it. The ability to recognize unfairness without allowing it to dictate your behavior. And the ability to choose your response instead of reacting automatically. Once you develop this habit, something interesting begins to happen. Situations that once felt chaotic begin to feel predictable. You begin to see patterns in how people behave under pressure. You begin to recognize when someone is attempting to control a narrative, and you begin to understand when silence is more powerful than immediate correction. Because in many cases, so the person who reacts first reveals the most while the person who waits learns the most. And in the quiet game of human dynamics, the person who understands the situation more clearly will almost always have the advantage. In the next chapter, we will explore another important layer of this dynamic, the subtle strategies people use to influence situations without appearing aggressive. Because the most effective manipulation rarely looks like manipulation at all. It looks like ordinary conversation. And learning to recognize those patterns is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Chapter 3. The manipulation tactics people use quietly. One of the most interesting things about manipulation is that it rarely looks dramatic. When people hear the word manipulation, they often imagine obvious deception, someone lying directly, someone aggressively controlling others, someone openly trying to dominate a situation. But in reality, the most effective manipulation rarely looks like that. In fact, the most powerful forms of manipulation are often so subtle that most people don't even notice them while they are happening. They look like normal conversations, casual comments, small suggestions, tiny shifts in how information is presented. And because they appear ordinary, they quietly shape perception without attracting attention. Understanding these patterns is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Not because you need to manipulate others, but because recognizing manipulation prevents you from becoming trapped by it. One of the most common tactics people use is something psychologists often describe as planting doubt. This tactic is rarely aggressive. Instead of directly attacking someone's reputation, a person might say something that appears harmless. A comment like, "I might be wrong, but I've noticed something a little concerning." Or, "I'm not sure if this is important, but maybe we should double check." At first glance, these statements appear cautious and responsible, but sometimes they are used strategically. The goal is not to prove anything. The goal is simply to introduce uncertainty. Once doubt enters a conversation, People begin to look at the situation differently, even if the claim is never proven and the seed has already been planted. Another subtle tactic involves reframing a narrative. In many situations, the person who controls the story controls the perception of the situation. Imagine two people describing the same event. One person might say, "We tried an experimental approach and learned something useful." Another might describe the same situation differently. "We made a mistake that caused unnecessary problems." Both statements describe the same event, but the emotional tone of the narrative is completely different. Strategic individuals understand this very well. They rarely argue about facts directly. Instead, they adjust how the story is framed. A small change in wording can dramatically change how others interpret the situation. Another tactic that appears frequently in social environments is selective visibility. This tactic is surprisingly simple. People highlight certain information while quietly ignoring other parts. Imagine a situation where a team completes 10 successful projects and one project fails. A person using selective visibility might focus all attention on the single failure. They might repeatedly mention that one mistake while ignoring the larger context of success. Over time, the repeated emphasis changes perception. The audience begins to associate the team with the failure rather than the success. This tactic works because human attention is limited. People often remember what is emphasized most frequently. Another form of subtle manipulation involves emotional positioning. This occurs when someone deliberately presents themselves in a way that influences how others perceive the situation emotionally. For example, a person might present themselves as the calm, reasonable voice in a discussion. They speak slowly, they appear composed. Meanwhile, they subtly provoke someone else into reacting emotionally. Once the other person becomes frustrated, the contrast becomes powerful. The calm individual appears rational. The emotional person appears unstable. Even if the emotional reaction was justified, perception now favors the calm figure. This tactic works because human beings often evaluate credibility based on emotional control. The calmer person usually appears more trustworthy. Another interesting pattern is what could be called information timing. Sometimes manipulation is not about what information is shared. It is about when it is shared. Imagine a situation where important details are introduced at the last possible moment. By the time others process the information, the decision has already been made. Technically, the information was shared, but the timing prevented anyone from responding effectively. This tactic allows someone to maintain the appearance of transparency while still controlling the outcome. Once you begin to notice these patterns, you start to see how subtle social influence can be. But something important must be said here. Recognizing manipulation is not the same as assuming malicious intent everywhere. Human behavior is complex. Sometimes people use these patterns unconsciously. Sometimes they are simply protecting themselves. Sometimes they are reacting to pressure. The goal is not to become paranoid. The goal is to become aware. Because awareness changes the way you respond. When you recognize a manipulation tactic, the emotional intensity of the situation often disappears. You stop reacting automatically. Instead, you step back and observe the structure of the interaction. You begin to ask questions. Why was that comment introduced now? Why was that information emphasized repeatedly? Why was that situation framed in that particular way? These questions shift your perspective from reaction to observation. And observation is the beginning of strategy. A strategist rarely fights every small manipulation. Instead, they understand the broader dynamic of the situation. They ask themselves a different question. What is the real objective here? Is someone protecting their position? Are they trying to shape perception? Or are they attempting to control a narrative before others have the chance to speak? Once you understand the objective behind the behavior, the situation becomes much clearer. And when clarity appears, emotional reactions become less necessary. You no longer feel the need to immediately defend yourself against every subtle move. Instead, you begin to think in terms of timing and positioning. Sometimes the best response is to calmly introduce missing information. Sometimes it is to allow others to notice the pattern themselves, and sometimes the most powerful move is simply to remain silent and let the situation reveal itself over time. Because manipulation depends on confusion. It depends on emotional reactions. It depends on people moving quickly without understanding the larger structure of the interaction. But when someone sees the pattern clearly, manipulation begins to lose its power. And in many situations, the quiet awareness of the strategist becomes the most powerful position in the room. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most underestimated forms of strategic advantage: silence. Because in a world filled with constant noise and reaction, the ability to remain silent at the right moment can become one of the most powerful forms of influence a person can possess. Chapter 4: The Strategic Power of Silence. In a world where everyone feels the need to respond quickly, silence has become rare. Most conversations today move fast. Someone says something, another person reacts immediately. Opinions appear within seconds. Reactions follow reactions, and before anyone has time to truly think, the situation is already moving in several directions at once. But the most strategic individuals understand something that many people overlook. Silence is not weakness. Silence is information. Silence is control. And sometimes silence is power. Many people feel uncomfortable with silence. When a conversation pauses, they rush to fill the space. They explain more. They defend themselves. They reveal thoughts that they would never have shared if they had simply waited. This is one of the reasons silence becomes such a powerful strategic tool. Because while most people feel the pressure to speak, the person who remains calm and quiet often gains a tremendous advantage. They observe, they listen, and they allow others to reveal more than they intended. Imagine a negotiation. Two people are discussing an important decision. One person makes an offer. Then the room becomes quiet. The natural instinct for many people is to break that silence. They begin explaining the offer. They add more details. They sometimes even weaken their own position without realizing it. But experienced negotiators understand something very different. After presenting an idea, they remain silent. They wait. They allow the other person to react first, because the person who speaks next often reveals the most information. This principle appears again and again in human interaction. People often expose their thinking when they feel the need to fill silence. They reveal uncertainty. They reveal priorities. They reveal emotional reactions. All of this information becomes visible to the person who is quietly observing. But silence does more than reveal information. It also shapes perception. In many social environments, the person who speaks less is often perceived as more confident, not because they say less, but because they appear more deliberate. When someone chooses their words carefully instead of speaking impulsively, others begin to interpret that behavior as composure, as control, as authority. Think about the difference between someone who reacts immediately to every comment and someone who pauses before responding. The first person appears reactive. The second appears thoughtful, and perception once again shapes influence. This is why many respected leaders develop the habit of pausing before they speak. Not because they are uncertain, but because they understand the value of slowing down the moment. A pause changes the rhythm of a conversation. It gives everyone time to think. It signals that the moment matters. And when the person finally speaks, their words often carry more weight. Silence also has another strategic effect. It disrupts emotional momentum. When someone attempts to provoke a reaction, they are usually expecting a quick response. They expect frustration, defensiveness, and argument. But when the other person remains calm and silent, something unexpected happens. The emotional energy has nowhere to go. The moment loses its intensity, and the person who attempted to provoke the reaction often becomes uncomfortable. In many situations, silence is the most powerful way to prevent manipulation from gaining momentum. Because manipulation often relies on emotional reactions. It relies on people responding quickly without thinking. But when someone refuses to react immediately, the situation changes. Instead of chaos, there is space. Instead of reaction, there is observation. And observation often reveals far more than words ever could. Of course, silence does not mean avoiding communication entirely. Strategic silence is not passive. It is deliberate. It is the decision to speak only when the moment is right. To share information when it strengthens your position. To remain quiet when speaking would only create unnecessary noise. One of the most powerful habits you can develop is the habit of listening more than you speak. Not in a passive way, but in an attentive way. Pay attention to how people describe situations. Notice what they emphasize. Notice what they avoid mentioning. Notice how their tone changes when certain topics appear. These details often reveal the true dynamics of a conversation. And the person who notices these patterns gains something incredibly valuable: understanding. Because once you understand the situation clearly, your actions become more precise. You no longer speak simply to react. You speak with intention. And when words are used with intention, they carry far greater influence. There is a quiet confidence that appears in people who have learned this skill. They do not rush into every conversation. They do not feel the need to prove themselves in every moment. They understand that influence is not created through constant speaking. Influence is created through clarity, through timing, through presence. And sometimes the most powerful presence in the room is the person who says very little but observes everything. Because when they finally speak, everyone listens. In the next chapter, we will explore another strategic principle that separates reactive individuals from strategic thinkers. The ability to choose your battles carefully. Because one of the greatest mistakes people make in difficult situations is believing that every conflict must be confronted immediately. But true strategy is not about fighting every battle. It is about knowing which battles truly matter. Chapter 5. Choose your battles like a chess player. One of the most common mistakes people make in difficult social situations is believing that every conflict must be confronted immediately. When someone challenges us, criticizes us, or behaves unfairly, the instinct to respond can feel almost automatic. It feels like defending your position is necessary. It feels like silence might look like weakness. So people react, they argue, they correct, they explain. But strategic thinkers understand something very different. Not every battle is worth fighting. In fact, some battles are designed to distract you. Some conflicts exist only to pull your attention away from what actually matters. And the moment you step into those unnecessary fights, you're already losing energy that could have been used somewhere else. And imagine watching a chess match between two experienced players. From the outside, the game may appear calm. There are long pauses, moments where nothing seems to happen, but beneath that quiet surface, every move has meaning. No piece moves without purpose. A skilled player does not attack simply because they can. They attack because the moment is right, because the position supports it, because the move advances a larger strategy. Human interactions often follow a similar pattern. Yet many people move through conflict like inexperienced chess players. They react to every move immediately. They respond emotionally. They feel compelled to defend every small challenge. But reacting to everything is not strength. It is distraction. Every time you react impulsively, you give away attention and energy. And attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Think about how many conflicts in daily life are actually temporary. A comment that feels irritating in the moment may disappear within hours. A misunderstanding may resolve itself naturally once more information appears. A person who tries to provoke you may lose interest if they receive no reaction. But if you engage immediately, the conflict grows. What could have been a small moment becomes a prolonged argument, and often the situation becomes more complicated than it ever needed to be. Strategic individuals recognize this pattern early. They learn to ask a simple but powerful question before responding. Does this battle actually matter? Sometimes the answer is yes. There are moments when speaking clearly and defending your position is important. Moments when silence could allow a harmful narrative to grow. Moments when a boundary must be set, but many other conflicts are not truly important. They are distractions. They are emotional traps. They are attempts to provoke a reaction. When you learn to distinguish between these situations, your behavior begins to change. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to pause. You begin to evaluate. You begin to see the situation from a wider perspective. And once you develop that perspective, many conflicts lose their urgency. Consider how experienced leaders often behave in tense environments. When a criticism appears, they do not always respond immediately. They observe the room. They consider the context. They think about the long-term outcome rather than the immediate emotional moment. Sometimes they respond. Sometimes they wait, and sometimes they choose not to engage at all. To someone who reacts impulsively, this behavior may look passive. But in reality, it is strategic because every reaction sends a signal. Every reaction reveals your priorities. And when you react to everything, you reveal that almost anything can capture your attention. But when you react selectively, you send a very different message. You communicate that your attention is valuable, that not every comment deserves your energy, that you are focused on something larger than small arguments. This shift in behavior changes how others interact with you. People quickly learn who can be easily provoked. They also learn who cannot. The person who reacts to every small challenge becomes predictable. Their behavior is easy to influence. But the person who chooses their battles carefully becomes difficult to manipulate because others cannot easily predict when they will respond, and unpredictability often creates respect. There is another reason why choosing your battles matters. Every conflict carries a cost. Even when you win an argument, you may lose something else. Time, energy, relationships, reputation. This is why strategic individuals think beyond the moment. They ask themselves what the outcome of the conflict will look like tomorrow or next week or next year. If winning the argument creates long-term damage, the victory may not be worth it. But if standing your ground protects something important, then the conflict may be necessary. The key difference is intention. Strategic thinkers do not fight because they feel provoked. They fight because the situation requires it. And when they do engage, they do so with clarity and purpose. They are not reacting. They are choosing. Over time, this approach creates a powerful advantage. Your attention becomes focused. Your reactions become deliberate, and your presence begins to feel more stable in environments where others are constantly reacting. People begin to notice that you are not easily pulled into unnecessary drama. They see that you are not distracted by every small challenge, and slowly something interesting begins to happen. The number of conflicts directed toward you often decreases because those who seek emotional reactions realize they will not find them easily. In many ways, strategy is not about controlling others, and it is about controlling your own attention. Where you direct your energy, where you choose to respond, and where you choose to remain still. Just like a chess player who waits patiently for the right moment to move. In the next chapter, we will explore another powerful advantage that strategic individuals develop over time. Patience. Because while many people rush to act quickly, the person who understands the power of patience often sees opportunities that others completely miss. Chapter 6. Patience. The advantage most people lack. One of the most underestimated advantages in human interaction is patience. Not intelligence, not talent, not even confidence. Patience. In a world where everything moves quickly, patience has become rare. People expect immediate results, immediate answers, immediate reactions. If something happens, they feel the need to respond right away. If someone challenges them, they feel the urge to defend themselves immediately. If an opportunity appears, they rush to act before thinking deeply about the consequences. But strategic individuals understand something that most people overlook. Time reveals things that emotion hides. When a situation first appears, it is often incomplete. Information is missing. Motives are unclear and emotions are usually at their highest. This is the worst moment to make an important decision. Yet, it is exactly when many people react. They respond quickly. They speak before thinking. They take action while the situation is still unfolding. But patience creates a different experience. When you slow down your reaction, you begin to notice details that others miss. You see how people behave when pressure appears. You see who reacts emotionally and who stays calm. You see who changes their story when new information appears. And these patterns reveal the true structure of the situation. Think about how many times a misunderstanding seems urgent in the moment. A comment feels offensive. A message seems unfair. A situation appears threatening. But after a day passes, new information appears, context changes, and what once felt serious suddenly seems much smaller. See, patience allows space for that clarity to emerge. It prevents you from committing to decisions based on incomplete information. In many ways, patience acts like a filter. It separates real problems from temporary emotional reactions. Without patience, every small issue feels urgent. With patience, you begin to see which issues truly deserve your attention. This principle appears clearly in negotiation. Experienced negotiators rarely rush. They understand that the person who is most impatient often gives away the most leverage. Impatience reveals desire. And once someone reveals how badly they want something, the balance of power begins to shift. Patience, on the other hand, signals confidence. It communicates that you are not desperate for an immediate outcome. And this perception changes how others approach the situation. Then people become more careful, more thoughtful, more willing to reconsider their position. The same pattern appears in social conflict. When someone tries to provoke a reaction, they are usually expecting an immediate emotional response. They expect anger, defensiveness, argument. But when that reaction does not appear, the situation begins to change. Without emotional fuel, the conflict loses momentum. The person attempting to provoke you often becomes uncertain. They may even begin to question their own approach. Patience interrupts the cycle of reaction. It creates a pause in the pattern, and that pause allows strategy to enter the situation. There is another powerful effect of patience that is rarely discussed. Time exposes inconsistency. When someone is manipulating a situation, maintaining that narrative over time becomes difficult. Details change, stories shift, small contradictions appear. But these inconsistencies only become visible if someone is paying attention long enough to notice them. Impatient individuals react before these patterns appear. Strategic individuals wait. They allow time to reveal the full picture. This is why patience often feels uncomfortable. It requires resisting the urge to act immediately. It requires trusting that clarity will appear if you give the situation enough space. And for many people, that waiting period feels like a loss of control. But in reality, patience is a form of control. It is the ability to prevent emotions from forcing a premature decision. Consider how experienced investors approach decisions. When markets move quickly, inexperienced participants often panic. They buy impulsively. They sell impulsively. They react to every fluctuation, but experienced investors often behave differently. They observe patterns over time. They analyze information carefully, and they wait for the moment when the opportunity becomes clear. This same mindset applies to human dynamics. Not every situation requires an immediate move. Sometimes the most strategic action is observation. Sometimes the most powerful decision is to wait, because while others rush forward, the patient observer gathers understanding, and understanding always creates stronger decisions. Over time, this habit of patience begins to change how you experience conflict. Situations that once felt urgent begin to feel manageable. Provocations that once triggered reactions begin to feel predictable. You begin to see the emotional patterns that drive human behavior. And once you see those patterns, you're no longer controlled by them. Instead, you begin to move through difficult situations with calm intention. You act when action matters. You wait when waiting reveals more, and you refuse to let temporary pressure dictate permanent decisions. This is the quiet strength of patience. It slows the moment. It reveals hidden information, and it allows strategy to replace impulse. In the next chapter, we will explore another element of quiet influence that often determines how people are perceived in social environments. Reputation. Because in many situations, reputation becomes the invisible currency that shapes opportunity, trust, and influence long before any words are spoken. Chapter 7. Reputation. The quiet currency of power. There is a form of influence that often works long before you say a single word. It does not appear in conversations immediately. It does not rely on arguments or persuasion. Yet, it quietly shapes how people treat you, how much they trust you, and how seriously your words are taken. That influence is reputation. Reputation is one of the most powerful and misunderstood forces in human interaction. Many people think reputation is simply about what others think of you. But in reality, reputation is something deeper. It is the pattern of behavior that people have observed over time. It is the accumulation of small moments. Moments where people saw how you handled pressure, how you treated others, how you responded to mistakes, and how you behaved when you had something to gain. These patterns slowly form an image in the minds of others. And once that image exists, it begins to influence every interaction that follows. Two people can say the exact same sentence and it will be interpreted completely differently depending on their reputation. If someone is known for being thoughtful and composed, their words will often be taken seriously. If someone is known for reacting emotionally, their words may be dismissed before the conversation even begins. This is why reputation functions like a quiet currency. It determines how much credibility you bring into the room before you even speak. And once people understand this, they begin to see reputation differently. It is no longer just a byproduct of behavior. It becomes a strategic asset, something that must be protected carefully. And one of the most common ways reputation is damaged is through emotional reactions. In moments of frustration, people often say things they later regret. They react impulsively. They defend themselves aggressively. And while the reaction may feel justified in the moment, the impression it creates can last much longer than the conflict itself. People rarely remember every detail of an argument, but they remember how someone behaved. Did they remain composed? Did they lose control? Did they respond thoughtfully or react impulsively? These impressions quietly shape how others perceive that person in the future. This is why emotional discipline is so important. Not because emotions are wrong, but because uncontrolled reactions can slowly erode the credibility you have built over time. Another threat to reputation comes from inconsistency. And if someone behaves differently in different situations, people begin to question their reliability. They may be respectful when speaking to someone with authority, but dismissive toward those with less influence. They may act confident when things go well but defensive when challenged. Over time, these inconsistencies become visible, and when people cannot predict how someone will behave, trust begins to weaken. Strategic individuals understand this. They work to maintain consistency in how they carry themselves. Not perfection, but consistency. They remain calm under pressure. They treat others with respect regardless of status. They respond to mistakes with accountability rather than denial. These behaviors may seem small in individual moments, but over time they form a powerful pattern, and a pattern that becomes visible to everyone around them. Reputation also acts as a form of protection. When someone with a strong reputation faces criticism, people are more likely to question the criticism itself. They think about the pattern they have already observed. They consider the person's history of behavior, and often they give that person the benefit of the doubt. But when someone with a weak reputation faces criticism, the opposite happens. People assume the criticism might be true even before hearing the full story. This is why reputation influences situations long before facts are fully known. It shapes the assumptions people bring into a conversation. Another important aspect of reputation is restraint. Strategic individuals do not feel the need to prove themselves constantly. Then they do not chase attention in every conversation. They allow their actions to speak over time. This quiet approach often creates a powerful effect. Because when someone speaks rarely but thoughtfully, people begin to listen more carefully. Their words carry weight, their presence carries credibility, and that credibility becomes a form of influence that requires very little effort to maintain. In contrast, individuals who constantly seek validation often weaken their own position. They explain too much. They defend themselves too often. They react to every criticism. And over time, this behavior can make them appear insecure even when their intentions are good. This does not mean you should remain silent in every situation. But it does mean that your responses should be deliberate rather than reactive. Your words should reinforce the reputation you want to build. A reputation of calm, a reputation of clarity, a reputation of fairness. Because once that pattern becomes visible, something interesting happens. People begin to treat you differently. They approach conversations with more respect. They listen more carefully. And they hesitate before attempting to challenge your position unfairly. Not because you demanded respect, but because your behavior consistently demonstrated it. This is the quiet power of reputation. It shapes perception long before conflict appears. It protects credibility when misunderstandings arise, and it allows influence to grow naturally over time. In the final chapter, we will explore how all of these principles come together into one powerful mindset. The mindset of the silent strategist. Because the true advantage in complex social environments does not come from aggression or manipulation. It comes from awareness, from patience, from emotional control, and from the ability to move through human dynamics with calm clarity while others are still reacting. Chapter 8. The silent strategy that wins in the long run. When people think about power or influence, they often imagine something dramatic. Strong personalities, loud voices, dominant presence. They imagine someone who commands attention the moment they enter a room. But real influence often looks very different. In many situations, the people who quietly shape outcomes are not the loudest or the most aggressive. They are the ones who understand the environment better than everyone else. They observe more, they react less, and they move carefully when the moment is right. This mindset could be described as the mindset of the silent strategist. A silent strategist does not rush into every situation trying to prove their strength. They understand that strength does not need constant display. Instead, they focus on awareness. They pay attention to the patterns that others ignore. They notice who reacts emotionally when pressure appears. They notice who attempts to shape narratives. They notice which moments create opportunity and which moments are simply distractions. This awareness gives them something incredibly valuable: perspective. Because when you see the patterns of human behavior clearly, many situations that once felt confusing suddenly become predictable. You begin to recognize the cycles of reaction. Someone provokes a response. Another person reacts emotionally. The situation escalates and soon the conversation is driven by emotion rather than clarity. But the silent strategist does something different. They step outside that cycle. They refuse to be pulled into emotional momentum. Instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of arguing, they evaluate. And instead of rushing forward, they choose the right moment to move. This approach often feels unfamiliar to people who are used to reacting quickly. They may interpret calmness as hesitation. They may interpret silence as weakness. But over time, the results speak for themselves. Because when you remain calm while others lose control, your perspective becomes clearer. You see opportunities that others miss. You notice contradictions in narratives. You recognize when a conflict is temporary and when it actually matters. And this clarity allows you to make decisions that are far more effective than impulsive reactions. Another important quality of the silent strategist is restraint. They understand that not every advantage must be used immediately. Sometimes the most powerful move is waiting. Sometimes allowing a situation to unfold reveals more than any immediate response could. People often reveal their intentions when they believe no one is watching carefully. They become careless. They contradict themselves. They expose motivations that were previously hidden. But these patterns only become visible to those who are patient enough to observe them. This patience creates an important shift in how you experience difficult situations. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by conflict, you begin to see it as information. Every reaction reveals something. Every emotional response reveals priorities. Every attempt to manipulate reveals an objective. And once you understand those objectives, the situation becomes much easier to navigate. There is also a quiet confidence that grows from this mindset. When you know that you are observing carefully and thinking strategically, you no longer feel the need to prove yourself constantly. You do not rush to defend every small criticism. You do not react to every provocation. And because you remain calm while others react, people begin to see you differently. They begin to perceive stability. They begin to associate your presence with clarity, and slowly your influence grows without requiring dramatic effort. This is one of the most surprising truths about human dynamics. Influence often belongs to the person who controls themselves, not the person who controls others. When someone demonstrates emotional stability in difficult situations, others naturally begin to trust their judgment. When someone responds thoughtfully rather than impulsively, their words begin to carry more weight. And when someone moves strategically rather than reactively, they begin to shape the environment around them. The silent strategist understands that control of self is the foundation of all influence. Without emotional discipline, awareness becomes clouded. Without patience, strategy becomes rushed. Without clarity, reactions become impulsive. But when these qualities work together, something powerful begins to happen. You move through complex social situations with calm focus. You recognize manipulation without becoming trapped by it. You protect your reputation without constant defense, and you choose your battles with intention rather than emotion. Over time, this mindset changes how others interact with you. Those who seek easy reactions begin to look elsewhere. Those who value thoughtful conversation begin to respect your presence. And situations that once felt chaotic begin to feel understandable. Because the moment you stop reacting to every move, you begin to see the game more clearly. And once you see the game clearly, you gain the ability to move through it with strategy instead of stress. The silent strategist does not seek conflict. They do not seek control over others. They simply understand the dynamics of human behavior and move through them with patience, awareness, and discipline. And in the long run, those quiet qualities often create far greater influence than any dramatic display of power ever could. Because while many people spend their energy reacting to the moment, the silent strategist is already thinking several moves ahead. At some point in life, most people discover something that changes the way they see human interactions. They realize that the world is not always as simple as it once seemed. Not every conversation is completely honest. Not every competition is completely fair. And not every person approaches situations with the same intentions. For many people, this realization can feel discouraging at first. It can create frustration, even a sense of disappointment. But over time, something interesting begins to happen. With experience, that same realization can become a source of clarity rather than frustration. Because once you understand how human dynamics actually work, you stop feeling confused by them. You begin to see the patterns. You recognize the moments when someone is trying to provoke a reaction. You recognize when a narrative is being shaped. You recognize when emotions are being used to influence perception. And instead of reacting automatically, you begin to observe. You begin to think. You begin to respond with intention. Throughout this audiobook, we explored several principles that quietly change how a person moves through complex situations. We talked about the hidden game of human nature, the way perception often influences outcomes more than pure facts. We explored the mistake many intelligent people make when they react emotionally instead of strategically. We looked at the subtle manipulation tactics that sometimes appear in everyday conversations. We discussed the strategic power of silence, the importance of choosing your battles carefully, and the advantage that patience creates when others rush to react, and the quiet influence that reputation builds over time. None of these ideas require aggression. None of them require manipulation, and none of them require becoming cynical about the world. Instead, they invite a different approach. An approach built on awareness, on emotional discipline, on patience, and on the ability to observe situations clearly before choosing how to act. From my own experience, one of the most valuable lessons in life has been learning that not every situation deserves an immediate reaction. When something unfair happens, the first instinct is often to respond quickly, to explain, to defend, to correct. But many times the most powerful response is not reaction. It is understanding. Understanding the structure of the situation. Understanding the motivations behind people's behavior. And understanding when a calm strategic response will be far more effective than an emotional one. Over time, this mindset begins to change the way you experience difficult moments. Situations that once felt chaotic begin to feel manageable. Provocations that once felt personal begin to feel predictable. And conflicts that once drained your energy begin to lose their power. Because you are no longer reacting blindly to what happens in front of you. You are seeing the patterns behind it. And when you see those patterns clearly, you gain something incredibly valuable. Control. Not control over other people, but control over your own response, your own attention, your own decisions. And that kind of control is one of the most powerful forms of influence anyone can develop. Because when a person remains calm while others are reacting, they naturally become a point of stability in the environment. People begin to listen more carefully. They begin to respect the clarity of that perspective. And slowly influence grows not through force but through consistency. The silent strategist does not seek attention. They do not chase conflict. They simply move through situations with awareness, patience, and intention. And over time, those quiet qualities create a powerful advantage. Because while others are reacting to the moment, the strategist is already thinking about the next move. If there is one idea to take from everything we discussed, it is this. You cannot control how others behave, but you can always control how you respond. And the moment you develop that discipline, the game changes. You stop feeling overwhelmed by situations that once felt unpredictable. You stop being pulled into conflicts that were never worth your energy, and you begin to move through the world with a calm clarity that few people ever develop. Thank you for spending this time exploring these ideas. And if these reflections helped you see human behavior from a new perspective, carry that awareness with you. Because the more clearly you understand the dynamics around you, the more confidently you can move through them quietly, patiently, and always thinking several steps ahead.